Batman, a name that strikes fear in the hearts of Gotham's criminal underbelly. Has big blubbery overbelly as well. Criminals' bellies, eh? A filthy rich playboy who runs a huge corporation by day and punches impoverished and facially disfigured people by night. A proper hero indeed. A hero without superpowers, gifted with a genius intellect and a near endless array of gadgets. Never go anywhere without your bat shark repellent. Batman has the will and agility of a top-class athlete and the fighting prowess of a cage full of UFC competitors. And he also has an awful lot of games. There's so many, more even than Spider-Man, whose game series I had previously covered. And today we're going to be counting the 5 very best and 5 very worst video games of the Dark Knight. Before we rush in though, and dip our batarangs in the deepest, dampest bat caves and waggle them around a lot until we're bat spent, shall we have a very brief overview of the becowled penguin botherer. It's 1939 and issue 27 of Detective Comics marks the debut of the rich orphan face puncher. The creation of the pair of Bob Kane and Bill Finger. His origin story is well known, given the sheer amount of games, comics, TV shows and movie franchises that the Cape Crusader has been in, and the amount of times we've seen his parents shot outside that theatre. We all know who Batman is, so I won't go into much detail on his character. It's true that Spider-Man now tops merchandise sales, yet there's still evidence that the Dark Knight is king of the superheroes. In 2021, Batman topped the amount of associated Instagram hashtags, a full 8 million ahead of the webbed wonder himself. Even more surprisingly, Batman's arch-nemesis the Joker was the most searched for comic character, full stop, last year on Google. Mad when you think of the amount of water-cooler superhero TV shows and movies being shown on Disney Plus and in the cinema in 2021, when the Joker really didn't have a lot going on. That, though, is testimony to the greatness of DC's Dark Detective. Not only is the hero himself a great creation, a underpowered underdog bound by a strict moralistic code, but the world he inhabits is also incredible. The sprawling grim cityscape of Gotham is a complex environment, and the litany of incredible intersecting cast of supporting characters and none better bestiary of criminal supervillains is part of that world. The total package that is Batman sets it apart from all that Marvel and DC has to offer, really. Batman isn't just a contender for the best comic creation from the 2 biggest comic houses. It should be considered the very best. Batman, the franchise, has a legacy of high quality. And no, I'm not talking about those mid-90s Batman movies. So we would hope that we would have a rich crop of excellent games starring the man who dresses up allegedly like a bat, but does he really? That doesn't look like a bat to me. And you know what? To be fair, I'd say it's easier to find titles that are average in quality and up than terrible ones. Oh, there are some right stinkers, don't you worry about that. The Wayne family games library is full of disgustingly poor games. There are some genuine classics in there though. Some really excellent titles, up with the very best titles on the machines that house them. Of course, by the sheer volume of titles, the chances are you're going to get 10 out of 10s, and also things that are the same quality as a scraping off Oswald Cobblepot's pants. Make no mistake, there are a lot of Batman games, and appearances, of course, by the Dark Knight in a lot of other games too, not just Justice League games, but the Mortal Kombat universe, the Lego Movie universe, and a load of other nods and references across the gaming spectrum. And speaking of spectrum, we've had games from the spectrum up until games announced for 2022, starring the Dark Knight himself. There's a lot of Batman games across every generation, And you know what? We're going to cover the absolute cream of the Catwoman and the contents of her litter box too in this video. And once again, it's personal opinion time, so no, there won't be an appearance from Lego games in the top 5 because I find the Lego games deathly boring. Please tell me how much of a glass of Two-Face's leaking cheek secretions I am in the comments for saying I don't like the Lego games. So let's alternate then between the good and the bad, the Heath Ledger's performances in Dark Knight against the George Clooney rubber nipples if you want.
And here we go.
Stay cool, bird boy.
Maybe this is a controversial choice given that it isn't too bad a game really. There are probably games that aren't as good, that probably deserve to be here, but that's not the real issue with Monolith's multiplayer only first person shooter. Indeed, across the board on Metacritic it's a solid 65 to 72 out of 100 FPS. The real issue with the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and PC Blaster is that the game itself is about as appealing as a fisting from a venomed up Bane. It's set in the DC universe, but Batman nor the Joker or indeed any characters from the Batverse actually appear. It's all a bunch of fanatics in Batman and Joker t-shirts they bought from Amazon shooting each other in the face. Well, who does this appeal to exactly? Yes, it makes sense that you can't play as 6 Batmen with machine guns because, you know, there's only one Batman unless you ignore like Azrael and Nightwing and all them. But he doesn't like guns either. But you know what, to me, this means don't make a Batman Call of Duty clone. Who does this appeal to exactly? It's utterly baffling and more than a little bit tone deaf. Despite that, the servers ran for 9 years and you were still able to buy this via Steam up until August 2021, but I cannot ever remember seeing an advert for a game and saying why though, so hard as I did when I first saw Gotham City Imposters. I mean, but why? Batman started his video game career with some aplomb in the 16-bit and 8-bit micro era, and I felt that at least one of those 3 big Bat titles from that era should be represented here. And the game that gets the recognition, despite some stiff competition from John Rittman's isometric adventure and the impressively varied Batman movie adaptations, is Batman the Caped Crusader. I've gone for this because it's a game that creatively captures the heritage of the character. Not only does the game use an artistic flair that has comic panels with text box outs, but this is a rare Batman game indeed. It involves a great deal more detective work than a lot of the games about, and remember this nickname, the Dark Knight Detective. Remember his debut? It was in Detective Comics. Batman does detective work. You lot only seem to care about Batman for his muscles. He's got a brain too, and here in 1988's Batman the Caped Crusader, developed by Special Effects for Ocean and released for the Amiga, the Atari ST, the Apple II, the MS-DOS, Commodore 64, Amstrad and Spectrum, you get a uniquely crafted arcade adventure. No, you don't actually, you get 2. There are 2 arcade adventures for you to get through. Lots of puzzles and detective work against the Penguin, and separately, in his own separate game, his own separate adventure, the Joker. They're both on the same tape or disc. Isn't that wonderful? And yes, you still get to punch stuff too, but will you stop thinking of Batman's pecs for a second, you gang of perverts?
The Iceman cometh.
Batman Dark Tomorrow had all the ingredients to be a huge success. Batman comic writer Scott Peterson teamed with Final Fantasy veteran Kenji Terada to write the script. The Royal Philharmonic Orchestra were on hand to make the game's excellent music pop. And the game was given 4 years to marinate in Kemco's development juices, and it was following Activision's genre-defining effort Spider-Man 2 as well, which was an open-world superhero effort of some excellence. Dark Tomorrow started off as a GameCube exclusive and also was supposed to be open world, involving all manner of different Bat vehicles. with costs rising rapidly due to the 4-year development, the decision was made to convert it also to the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox, which meant the game was simplified into a more linear stealth effort. What we ended up with was a laboured effort with absolutely dreadful controls, a high difficulty, boring gameplay and blurry, dreary graphics. It's stiff, it's clunky, and worst of all, it's unfinished, this despite those 4 years. Dark Tomorrow was a game with much promise, and ultimately it was a promise that was to remain unfulfilled. It's thought of as one of the worst Batman games. Later on in this list, I will be doing some expert fence sitting with the deft agility of Dick Grayson, or even better, an actual Robin. Yes, by the end of the video I'm going to be an indecisive Thomas, so rather than be Johnny Indecisive for the whole video, I'm going to take the time to flip a Two-Face style coin on this one. Batman the Animated Series was an absolutely fantastic cartoon, a surprisingly adult stylised effort on at sugar cereal rush time on a Saturday morning. Excellent animation and a brilliant voice cast saw Batman the Animated Series become a certifiable hit wherever it was shown. And it eventually spawned the excellent Batman and Robin series. And the Batman and Robin series itself laid a perfect little egg filled with two beautiful young 16-bit games, those being on the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo. The Mega Drive version was a gobsmacking video game published by Sega and developed by Clockwork Tortoise Inc. that pushed the Mega Drive, and indeed the conversion onto the Mega CD, to their absolute limits. They felt a bit like a treasure game, like Gunstar Heroes or something like that, but the high difficulty level just pushes it under the Super Nintendo game's polished triumph. The Super Nintendo game, made by Konami, was a tremendous side-scrolling effort, a platformer with a graphical style that captured the look of the show. Batman and Robin is a look into Konami at the peak of their powers, a sad reminder of what that software house has become, damn you pachinko. It's a game that throws around Mode 7 with gay abandon and gives us a game just as good as the Contra 3s and Castlevania 4s and other 16-bit Super Nintendo classics that Konami are well known for. Konami's decline is incredibly tragic, and something even the Riddler himself would have trouble figuring out.
Night! Hell freezes over.
The future is bright. The future is turgid like swamp water. PlayStation 1 and N64, Batman Beyond was the kind of dreck that plagued the first generation of 3D graphics consoles. It was based on a well-regarded animated series that followed on from the animated shows of the 90s, with an aged Batman training up a young protege to battle his resurrected nemesis, the Joker, in 2019. Ooh, the future. Batman Beyond, the game, is not as good as that cartoon at all. It's an unbalanced catastrophe. The thing is, a Batman game should make you want to be Batman, and this game sort of does, I suppose. You should be controlling a spry 16-year-old Batman in Terry McGinnis, but actually it feels like you are controlling Batman, as in the septuagenarian Bruce Wayne. It controls appallingly. You can't jump and attack at the same time. Weapons are ineffectual. Batman Beyond is a terrible example of those early 3D platform games based on a show, you know, like that reboot game or the one based on Beast Wars. They were terrible. This is terrible. Batman Beyond is to Batman what Superman 64 was to the Man of Steel. It's almost overlooked how bad this game is. And yet it's not even the worst game on this list, or the second worst game on this list. Yikes, we've got some stinkers to come, haven't we? The 2011 sequel by Rocksteady is everything that Batman Beyond and Dark Tomorrow wasn't. The promise of those titles was realised as he swooped around an Escape from New York inspired sealed off section of Gotham, dealing out begloved justice to the wrong-uns of Arkham. A fleshed out world full with a gamut of Batman villains to punch in the chops was fleshed out and gave you the opportunity to cause and indeed stop havoc in a very dangerous environment that was full of Easter eggs and nods to the Batman universe. The Arkham series would never be better than the initial two efforts, but more on the first game in a while. Arkham City was a gorgeous title with great side missions and a compelling story. Though come on Rocksteady, the sheer amount of Riddler trophies were as cruel as Mr. J was to poor old Harley. Other than that, Arkham City is superb stuff. Play it today or yesterday if you've got a time machine.
Freeze in hell, Batman!
The makers of Dark Tomorrow, after 4 years and on better hardware, decided that a fully 3D Gotham City was a bit beyond their reach, so they went for a linear effort, and it still stank like the inside of Black Mask's face covering after a hot summer's day in Gotham. Maybe it could have been a bit better if they'd looked at Acclaim's Batman and Robin first. Developed by Spectrum Programming legends Probe Entertainment, Batman and Robin was incredibly ambitious. For a movie licence, there is a real effort put in here. For sure there is, but it's way too much for the PlayStation 1 to handle. The execution is as rough as the Killer Croc's arse skin. There's 3 selectable characters, a full city to hover, jump, climb and drive around. There are dozens of moves, toggleable with the L2 button. There's a lot to see and do in this Gotham City inspired by Joel Schumacher's world. It's definitely a lot more ambitious as a game than, say, Virus was as a movie adaptation, and quite frankly, Batman and Robin is way more ambitious than the movie it's based on deserves. And yet it feels like a fan-made remake of Arkham Origins or something. It's sort of kind of charming in a way, but it's also depressingly slow, annoying to play, ugly as sin, and it's frustrating to engage with in any way, shape or form. The Batmobile is too fat to steer around the twitching, struggling textures of PlayStation-era Gotham. Batman and his cohorts, Robin and Batgirl, struggle along like an old fella or Alicia Silverstone's career. It's just trying too hard on a machine that is incapable of doing a game of this nature. It really is trying, but ultimately it condemns it to being the second worst Batman game. A shame, but it is dreadful, and don't play it. Surely no other movie can compete when it comes to the sheer amount of incredible yet very different game adaptations than Batman the movie. Whether it's Ocean's excellent variety pack of different genres on the home micros, the Batman with a pistol Mario Land aping immensely playable Game Boy title by Sun Electronics Corporation, Atari's competent arcade rolling Thunder Love Letter, Sunsoft's passable Shinobi clone on the Mega Drive, or the same company's strange but enjoyable Batman Pac-Man collect 'em up on the PC Engine. It is fair to say the Batman 89 had some real good quality video games based upon it. It was such an event movie, really they could have got away with a load of Clayface droppings, yet all these stops were pulled out and we ended up with a whole ton of different games companies putting out top tier efforts, and we can thank them for that. But the shiniest gem in this trough of diamonds is Sunsoft's NES effort. It follows the movie about as well as a goldfish tries to follow Inception, and it features all sorts of killer mechanical contraptions, Boba Fett lookalikes and anime goons that are trying to slaughter the decidedly purple looking Dark Knight detective. It is far removed from Batman 89 the movie, there's no doubt about that. But what it is a more accessible version of Ninja Gaiden, with bats bouncing off walls with a tight control system and deft agility. It's got a brooding Tim Burton look to it, a firm but fair difficulty level, and a console best soundtrack. Really, this is the best music that was ever put on the NES. It's also a game that has aged very well, a thing that you can't say about a lot of the NES games of the time. I would say it's easily a contender for not only the best Batman game ever made, but also a surefire entry into most people's top 10 NES games. Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight? Well, maybe you should.
Their bones would turn to ice.
Just as there is some tough competition for the best game to be picked from the Batman 89's rich library of goodness, there are some rich man bat guano to be scooped through to find the absolute nadir of the bat game genre from the movie's second sequel. Most of these games are based around the same engine, by repeat offenders Acclaim and Probe. Yes, from the Game Boy to the Super NES to the PlayStation, we've got the same game here in various guises. So where to begin? Well, the graphics are horrible. Horrible. Pre-rendered and so 1995 that you can almost see them drinking hooch and laying down a load of tissues by themselves just in case Daniela Nardi has a sex scene in this evening's episode of This Life. That's how 1995 that is. The Mortal Kombat and Donkey Kong Country era of gaming was a dark time for me stylistically. It felt like the programming team were just being lazy bastards. I can't be bothered to draw or animate anything today, just take 1,000 pictures of Chris O'Donnell and Tommy Lee Jones instead. Then flap them around in front of a background like they're little cardboard men and everyone will think we're great. Honestly, you people like Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam and games like that and their graphics, what are you thinking? Those games look terrible. But it wasn't just the graphics that were Mortal Kombatized, if you will. The awkward controls too have made the leap from the world of Midway's ultra-successful Spine Ripper, and it is to the utter detriment of this game. When you move one-on-one fighting controls into a platformer, you somehow have to find room in your control system so that, your character can maneuver between, platforms in the platforming game. In Batman Forever, you traverse upwards by, and I'm not joking here, on the Super Nintendo version you do it by pressing up and select. The select button is used, along with the up button, to jump between platforms. The select button. Moving down is even worse. You have to slightly press R, just a little bit, just slightly press R, and then press down. It's as intuitive as trying to operate the Batwing with the understanding of a Neanderthal with a fatal skull injury. Marry that up with the awful music, the terrible ending, and a difficulty level just on the wrong side of near impossible, and you have a game that even unlockable nudes of Margot Robbie and Anne Hathaway, couldn't save it. And no, they're not in there before you go and buy the game. I think they would have been near to children, or at least teenagers, in 1995, you unspeakable perverts. Oh, and special shout out to the complete nonsense that is the unrelated arcade that was also by Acclaim and Probe, but that saw a release on the Saturn and PlayStation 1. It plays terribly, but look, Batman's tiny for some reason. Great. Well done. Arkham Asylum is a triumph. Rocksteady seemingly came out of nowhere in 2009 and finally delivered a 3D Bat game that wasn't just not terrible, wasn't just not slightly better than average, it was phenomenal. A taut, atmospheric video game packed with the best elements of all the various Bat media. Batman and Joker were voiced by Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, reprising their roles from the animated shows. Veteran comic writer Paul Dini was brought in to pen the script, and elements of the Burton and Nolan films were sprinkled in this lovely goulash to give the game a DNA that felt very Batman at its very core. There are tiny nods and Easter eggs to the heroes and villains, even the ones that aren't present, all throughout the grounds of the Asylum. The contained nature of the environment as well actually helps to focus the narrative a little bit more effectively than the game's sequel, which I had there at number 3, which is why I think it's nudged a little bit higher than that game in my list. Arkham Asylum is one of the 360 and PlayStation 3's premier titles. It plays great, doesn't outstay its welcome, and most importantly makes you feel like you, yes you fat schlub, are the Cape Crusader himself. The stealthy cat and mouse goon hunting sections of the game are some of my favourite moments in video games. They are absolutely perfect. You are Batman in that moment. You are he. So there we go then, Batman games. Have a look at the Spider-Man list I made last year as well, and who knows, there might be another one of these when a film comes out which has a character in it that has loads of video games. Maybe. But Batman, he's the hero Gotham deserves, but not the one it needs right now. Especially if it's Batman and Robin, or Batman Forever. Like, subscribe, and K thanks, bye.